Mm, okay, let's go ahead and start. Welcome back, everyone. Mm, So, just like yesterday, let's start with a brief meditation. Again, to generate some mental focus and generate a positive motivation. Mm, So again, check through the 7 points of the posture, meditation posture. Actually, it's called the Vairocana meditation posture. Vairocana is one Buddha. There's 5 Buddha families, and Vairocana is the head of one of the Buddha families that has to do with the form aggregate. So the body in essence. Yeah, so this posture is called the 7-point Vairocana posture. So the 7 points again that I described the first day are to do with the legs, the legs being arranged in a comfortable position, then the back and the torso being straight, erect, and relaxed, balanced. Shoulders being broad and open. The hands in the lap. The right hand on top of the left and the tips of the thumbs touching. And then resting in front of the 2 hands resting in front of the navel. If you're sitting cross-legged and you rest your hands like that, depending on how your legs are, it can be a bit uncomfortable. It can be a bit difficult to find a position to rest the hands on the legs that feels like comfortable, so they're not turned right or left or too far and tough, too much to the front or too much to the back or something. Because if you have the hands right against the navel, it you feel like there's too much weight to your back, so you tend to fall back, right? So it helps to have the hands a little bit, about say like 4 inches or 6 inches out from the navel, but then there's no leg to rest on, so they're falling off your ankle. So, well, oh yeah, okay. Because then if they're just hanging, it kind of puts more weight on your shoulders, right? It's not so comfortable, and you have to like hold it there, which becomes difficult. So yeah, it's good to have fold up a towel, or have a little pillow or a towel to put it. I like a towel because then you can arrange how thick or thin it is, right? Or a little shawl or something to kind of pile it up in your lap and rest your hands on top of that. Makes it more comfortable. Little tricks, no? So yeah, so the third point is the shoulders, the fourth is the hands, fifth is the head. Yeah. So again, the head, the chin tucked slightly in, the back of the neck slightly elongated. Yeah. And then imagine this kind of straight line from the very crown of the head down, through the along the spine to the base of the spine. And then the eyes half closed and the gaze cast downwards. Sometimes, it's said leave your eyes half closed, half open to let some light in, so to keep the mind a bit more alert, prevent you from becoming drowsy. But then, yeah, like I explained before, you don't focus on any point, you don't look at anything, particularly with your eyes. Just let your gaze rest unfocused. But even with that, you can experiment. Sometimes, like I noticed the other day when we were watching the sensation of breath at the tip of the nose, then there's a tendency to bring the gaze back to almost kind of look at the tip of the nose. And in some meditation manuals, there is that instruction too, to focus the eyes on the tip of the nose. But like His Holiness always says, and you can see in your own experience, that becomes a bit painful, no? I mean, it's a bit of a strain on the eyes to actually look at the tip of your nose. So, but the idea is that you can pull your focus, your visual focus, kind of back closer to your face, or let it extend out more, towards the ground. Yeah, you can try different ways, but whatever's comfortable is the main thing. And you're not looking at anything. And then the mouth and the teeth. So the lips and teeth, you rest in a natural position, and the tip of the tongue, you touch to the gums or the roof of the mouth just behind your front teeth. And then another thing I didn't mention before is when you're, settling into the meditation posture, it can help to kind of feel the connection of your body with the ground and the cushion you're sitting on. Kind of feel the weight of your body as it settles down on the cushion. That gives some sense of stability. No? It's said sometimes, especially when you're doing placement meditation or generating single pointed concentration, that one's concentration should be like a mountain. So sometimes to feel more stable, sitting on a meditation cushion, it can help to bring that kind of analogy to mind, that your body is like a mountain, just sitting very, very solidly, immovable on a plane. Um, Generally, you can see, when you bring your awareness more to the lower part of your body, you feel a bit heavier and more stable. So, and then when you bring your awareness more to the upper part of your body or to your head and the crown of your head, you feel more light and spacious. So just experimenting with that and seeing how that is, then you can use that in different ways. While you're meditating, focusing your awareness more lower down in your body or up higher in your body at different times to bring more kind of stability and kind of heavy feeling, or to bring more lightness and open feeling according to what you need to be balanced. You can see that even when you visualize, if you're like using a visualized image to focus your attention on, then like an image of Shakyamuni Buddha, if you if the mind's tending to be kind of drowsy and a bit sluggish, then it helps to imagine the image, visualize the image being higher up, like at the height of your forehead, or even above the crown of your head, or even in the space in front of you a bit higher. Because just visualizing something higher up, it lifts the mind up. Whereas if your mind is very distracted and you tend to, your thoughts are racing, then it can help to visualize the image being lower down at the level of your heart, or even lower down at the level of your navel. And then visualizing that way helps kind of bring the mind down, slow it down, make it a bit more stable. Anyway, so having gone through the 7 points of the Vajrayana posture, then we can scan through the body. Again, check for any sense of obstruction or discomfort or a blockage in your energy. Imagine each time you exhale, that flows out with the breath and flows down just out of the lower part of your body into the ground. Becomes kind of nourishment in the ground. And then each time you exhale, imagine drawing in the life-giving, the life force of the air, in the form of like white light, gradually pervades every cell in your body. Mm. And then briefly generate a positive motivation. No thinking for yourself. Why are you here? Why are you participating in this session? And what would you like to accomplish or work towards? Um, yeah, benefit for oneself, benefit for others. What benefit for yourself, what benefit for others would you like to bring about by participating in the session? Mm. And then let's practice placement meditation for a few minutes, just to, yeah, practice focusing our attention and generating that kind of ability of focusing our attention as we like. So we'll use the same object as we used the last 2 days, the sensations of breath at the tip of your nostrils. So just become aware of this sensation. Breathe naturally. Yeah, so just breathe naturally. And then be aware of the sensations of breathing as you inhale and exhale at the tip of the nostrils. And make a determination in your mind that I'm going to the best of my ability, I'm going to focus on these sensations of breathing at the tip of the nostrils for, let's say, 5 minutes. And then with the main part of your mind, like 75% of your mental energy, just try to be continually and fully aware of the sensations of breathing in that way. And with 25% of your mental attention, kind of like a spy, looking uh, upon your own process of meditation, then and kind of being like like a guard, patrolling a palace, looking for intruders. So, but this 25% of your mind, called introspection, is looking for distraction arising in the mind. And as soon as your mind wanders off to think about something else or pay attention to something else, then it's the job of that corner of the mind to notice that, recognize that as a distraction, and then let go of, you know, the desire of the mind to follow that, to, to pay attention to something else, to dwell on something else, and then bring your attention back to the object of meditation at this time. So you have to do that again, again and again. Gradually it becomes less and less, but yeah. So again, put the main part of your attention, 75% of your mental energy, into just trying to fully keep the mind's focus on the sensations of breathing. So that's called mindfulness, that aspect. So we use mindfulness and just introspection. Then observing the breath for 5 minutes. Mm. Okay, so relax your attention there. And that's a little meditation. Then we'll pick up where we left off yesterday. So, yeah, yesterday we discussed the life of Shakyamuni Buddha, and then the spread of Buddhism in the world, giving rise to different traditions in Buddhism, different schools. Um, maybe so then, well, maybe I'll just say a bit more about the Tibetan tradition, since that's what personally, that's what I've trained in, and that's what this center, Ocean of Compassion Center, is part of the Tibetan tradition. Um, and then how to, as an individual, how to navigate like and relate to all these different traditions in Buddhism, and how to choose like which one to focus on in a way. So the Tibetan tradition, as I think I mentioned yesterday, Buddhism first spread to Tibet probably around 800 CE. Um, and before in Tibet, before Buddhism, they had a religion called Bon, which is sort of a shamanistic kind of religion, worshiping different local spirits and things. Um, yeah, um, but there was, yeah, I don't know why. I think probably the early. I mean, it was because Tibet was a kingdom up until just recently. Was governed by a king, and I guess there was a lot of seems there was a lot of violence and crime and warfare between different tribes. There's Tibet. I mean, the Tibetan people are very tribal. There's because there's you know it's a very mountainous area with high mountain passes between valleys. So most people live along river valleys, and then they're separated by high mountain passes. So it's very difficult for people to go one place to another. So there's not a lot of movement among people. So then people have very strong identity with their local village or the people in their same river valley, their same area. Um, and even the language represents that. There's many different dialects in Tibet. Even it's all Tibetan generally, but there's many very different dialects with completely different vocabulary um, of people in different regions. Um, so um, yeah. Anyway, it seems so. So there was a lot of conflict apparently between the different people from different regions, different tribes in Tibet, and family clans. And so one of the early kings, Tenzin Gompo, he decided to adopt a more peaceful kind of religion to try to bring more peace to the people and to the land, more harmony. And so, yeah, he decided to adopt Buddhism at some point. So, yeah, it said the Tibetan people, they adopted their food from the Chinese, like momos are very common. It's like dim sum. Uh, adopted their food from the Chinese, adopted their clothing from the Mongolians, and adopted their religion from the Indians. So everything they adopted from other people. Then, um, anyway, so in about 700 CE or so, then Sonsun Gompo sent some emissaries from Tibet to India to actually the first thing I have. What are you? The the first thing to begin this process of adopting Buddhism. And the first thing they needed to do was come up with a script because they didn't have a written script before that. They're quite, nomadic pastoral people, right? So they had spoken language, Tibetan, but they didn't have a written script. So Togme Sambota was this first Tibetan scholar to come to India, study Sanskrit and different religions in India, and then settle on one, and then create a script to make a written Tibetan language. So he did that. Still, in these days, in the monastery, when we study grammar, we study grammar texts that were composed by him. Togme Sambota. He wrote this, root grammar text for Tibetan written language. Yeah. So then, and then the first there was the first. Then they invited a great Buddhist master from India. So the first great Buddhist master from India to go to Tibet was named Shantarakshita. And he was an abbot of ancient Nalanda University. So he went, he was already elderly, I think, when he went, but he went and tried to start building a monastery in Tibet. But it said that, I mean, they say he would, because he's supported by the king, right? So he has a lot of workers. So they'd build up, in Tibet, they usually build buildings out of mud bricks. They make mud bricks and then stack them up. So they would stack up, some mud bricks in the day, and then at night they would be torn down by spirits, it's said, but who knows? No. But it said that the malevolent spirits in Tibet, because they'd been worshipped for thousands of years, were very against this, bringing a new religion, and that so they would create a lot of obstacles. So finally, Shantarakshita said, I can't subdue all these spirits here. You need to bring a Buddhist master who has the power to do that, who's a great, a tantric yogi. So then, and he said there's one in India, his name is Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, you should invite him. So then King Songtsen Gompo invited Padmasambhava to come to Tibet. So then he came, and then he, through different rituals and kind of tantric practices, he subdued the spirits especially in central Tibet at first, and then other places. And then then together they built a monastery. Samye is the first monastery built in Tibet, Buddhist monastery. Samye, and then they ordained, I think, an original group of 25 monks who were all sons of the aristocrats, the kind of hierarchy, and aristocrats, the leaders, leading families in central Tibet. And actually, I'm not sure how. Actually, there were 25 original translators who, were intelligent, young men from prominent families and had a good education. And then they were sent to India to begin to collect texts and start translating texts. So there was this huge translation project that was embarked on. Anyway, so there were, between Shantarakshita and Padmasambhava, and then this first group of 25 translators, there was, a whole body of Buddhist teachings translated from Sutra and Tantra, and transmissions of Buddhist teachings given to the Tibetan people. And so that whole body of teachings it became known as the old school, right? It's called the Nyingma, right? So in Tibetan, there's 4 schools now in Tibet. So you can divide them into 2 groups, the Nyingma and the Sarma. Nyingma means the old school, and the Sarma means the new schools. So in this first wave of Buddhism spreading to Tibet, then those lineages became known as the Nyingma, and that kind of style of practice that arose with that. And that still exists to today. You can find Nyingma centers even in the Bay Area, Nyingma teachers, Nyingma centers. Although I'm not really familiar with what they are. But then shortly after that, there was an anti-Buddhist king who arose in Tibet. Langdharma was his name. And he persecuted Buddhism and tried to wipe it out in Tibet because he was a follower of Bon. And he was quite successful. Buddhism almost disappeared for a period of about 200 or 300 years in Tibet. Then after that, there was another king from more western Tibet who, he and his nephew, who was his successor, they were very devoted Buddhists, and they wanted to revive Buddhism in Tibet. So they invited Atisha Dipamkara Srijnana, who's a Indian Buddhist master from West Bengal, and he was the abbot of Vikramashila monastery in central North India. So he came to Tibet and taught for about 17 years. And then, so that was the beginning of this new wave of Buddhism spreading in Tibet again. And that in between Atisha coming and then other Buddhist masters also coming, whose names I don't remember so much, they're not as famous. And then also many Tibetans at that time, again, going to India and again, receiving teachings and translating more texts. So that gave rise to this whole group, group of 3 different schools, collectively known as the Sarma, the new schools. Of those, the oldest is the Shakya. Then the second oldest is the Kagyu, and the newest is the Geluk school. So this center, Ocean of Compassion Buddhist Center, is part of a larger global organization called the Foundation for the Preservation of Mahayana Tradition. And this whole collection of centers in this Dharma organization was founded by two lamas that belong to primarily to the Geluk school. They primarily studied and trained in the Geluk school of Tibetan Buddhism. Although, like most Tibetan masters, they take teachings and have teachers from all four different traditions. No, although there has been some sectarian rivalry in the past in the history of Buddhism in Tibet, now the four schools they're quite harmonious and have mutual respect for one another. And most Tibetan Buddhist masters study all four schools, or at least different aspects of our school. So there's a lot of mixing between them. Like in the monastery, when I was at the monastery with a lot of Tibetan monks come from Tibet. Most of them, they all have like relatives. They have big extended families. No, they all have relatives. Some of them are Nyingma, some are Kagyu, some are Shakya. It's all like, they don't really discriminate much between. It's all kind of the same, just slightly different flavor. It's like all ice cream. Ice cream is all milk and sugar, with just little different flavors. It's not much difference really. Like that. So, but one thing I'd like to make clear, actually, the main point about Tibetan Buddhism, the main point about Tibetan Buddhism I'd like to make, because in the past, when Western scholars sort of first took interest in Buddhism and look in the different schools of Buddhism, lineages of Buddhism, then they would, because Tibetan Buddhism is quite different than the others in the aesthetics. It's very colorful. And then also in Tantra, there's a lot of Tantra, practice of Tantra in Tibetan Buddhism. So some early Western scholars had the idea that a lot of aspects of Tibetan Buddhism, especially all this Tantra, is something that just was an aspect of Tibetan culture itself, was just added by the Tibetans. It's not actually Buddhism. So they would call it Lamaism, because Lama means guru in Tibetan. And there's a really very strong emphasis on, correctly relating to one's guru, to one's teacher, because that's it's a central aspect of practice in Tantra. And so Tantric Buddhism has a very strong effect, very influential in the Tibetan tradition. And so there's this practice of correctly relating to one's guru, seeing one's guru in a pure way. It's very strong in Tibetan Buddhism. So because of that, then some Western scholars would say that Tibetan Buddhism is like a corruption of Buddhism, and it's this kind of Lamaism. It's not really Buddhism, but that's very much not the case. No, if you look at the main texts that are the basis for all four schools of Tibetan Buddhism, they all study called the Five Great Treaties. Right, so they base the practice of Vinaya is a very pure morality, especially for lay and ordained people. And the main text they study of Vinaya is by Gunaprabha, who's a master of an Indian Buddhist master of ancient Nalanda University. And then the main text for study of logic and valid cognition, like how do we know things, are by Dignaga and Dharmakirti, who are two other masters, ancient Indian masters of Nalanda University. And then the text to study the middle way, the view of emptiness and selflessness and dependent arising, the middle way view. Then they study, the primary text is by Chandrakirti and his commentary on Nagarjuna's root wisdom. And then they use other commentaries to supplement that by Aryadeva, Haribhadra, Buddhapalita, and these are all masters of ancient India, right, of Nalanda University. And this is common in all, like I said, in the Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, Geluk, it's all the same. They all study these five great treaties. And then the commentary on the method side of the Bodhisattva path, whereas the middle way is the wisdom side of the Bodhisattva path. The method side of the Bodhisattva path is taught in the Ornament of Clear Realization by Maitreya. So that's another great text. And then they use the ancient Indian commentaries on that, primarily the one by Haribhadra. Um, yeah, Haribhadra. So that's another great text. So what is it? So these five great treatises by Gunaprabha. Oh yeah, Abhidharma is the one I've left out. Um, and then so Abhidharma is the fifth this great treatise, and they study primarily there's two main Abhidharma commentaries composed by Indian masters, one by Vasubandhu and another by his elder brother Asanga. Yeah, Asanga. So yeah, but primarily we study the one by Vasubandhu. So in short, the Tibetan tradition is not, I mean, and then Tantra, then the Tantras that they study, they study Tantras that they're part of the Kangyur, part of the word of the Buddha. There's not things made up by the Tibetans. They study, the main text are, the root text are by Nagarjuna and Chandakirti. And the Geluk. Although here the four schools, they differ a little bit because the Nyingma, Sakya, Kagyu, Geluk, they have a little bit different emphasis on what lineages of different tantric teachings and initiations that they focus on. So of course the Nyingma, they focus on those tantras taught by Guru Rinpoche, by Padmasambhava, who's also a master of Nalanda University. And then the Sakya, the Sakya I'm the least familiar with. I know they focus on, as a deity, Hevajra is primary, and Vajrayogini. But those, especially Vajrayogini lineages, Hevajra also, I think they both come from Tilopa and Naropa. In the Kagyu, also they focus on Guya Samaja. But the Kagyu clearly comes from Naropa primarily. The founder of the Kagyu lineage is Marpa Lotsawa, and his main teacher was Naropa, although he had other teachers. And then, yeah, Ra Lotsawa was also there. He's the founder of the Yamantaka lineage in Tibet, and his teachers were mainly from Nepal. And then, and the Geluk, the founder of the Geluk, Lama Tsongkhapa, when he, at the time, he's more like, he kind of comes at, he doesn't have any Indian teachers. By the time Tsongkhapa rose, Indian Buddhism had died out in India. So he doesn't have any Indian teachers. He's looking at all these lineages that were brought to Tibet by other people before him, and then kind of reassessing those, and within those, what's authentic in relation to the sutras and the tantras that were taught by the Buddha, what's authentic, and what are things that are kind of misunderstandings that have arisen like that. So he's kind of a reformer who came later. But in short, I mean, Tibetan Buddhism is this is the main point His Holiness Dalai Lama always makes, is Tibetan Buddhism is like the lineage of ancient Nalanda University, right? Ancient Nalanda University was one of the first universities to arise anywhere in the world, and the largest at that time existed. It was the largest, had thousands and tens of thousands of people studying there, from all the different, from the Theravada tradition and also the Mahayana tradition, and even those, from different Hindu sects would come there to study different sciences, and they would study all the 5 sciences, which include grammar, language, poetry, medicine, logic and reasoning, and then also Buddhism. So it was a kind of full university in that way. So yeah, His Holiness always emphasizes that Tibetan Buddhism is not. Yes, there are aspects maybe of the iconography and the art, and the way the colorful like cloth kind of things, like prayer flags, is something the Tibetans made up. No, and these elaborate rituals relating to different spirits. Because when Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, this first Indian master to come to Tibet, he subdued many spirits, and then subdued them means like kind of converted them to the side of Buddhism. And instead of being antagonistic to Buddhism, he made them take oaths that they would support Buddhist practitioners and Buddhist practice. And so that is a big part of Tibetan Buddhism, is making offerings to and relating to, propitiating these different spirits to invoke their ability to support Buddhist practitioners and Buddhist practice, which you don't find so much You do find a bit of that in other, Buddhist countries also. Like even in Sri Lanka, when I visited, temples there, almost every Buddhist temple in every village, they'll have. I mean, in Sri Lanka, every village has a Buddhist temple with a few monks. They always have a main prayer hall, a stupa with some relics of the Buddha, usually a Bodhi tree and a big bell. Like those are the things every temple in Sri Lanka has. It's very beautiful. If you ever want to, I mean, as you know, we're all like uh, people in America studying Buddhism. So, I mean, we have access to a lot of good books and videos and like explanations, and a lot of visiting teachers come. But it's not the same as like being in a place where everyone's Buddhist, right? It's a totally different feeling to go. And so, if you're really interested in Buddhism, it's invaluable to go to a place where like everyone's Buddhist and see just kind of how it is. What's the vibe there? What does it look like? How is it part of people's everyday lives? Um, and yeah, how do you feel being there in those different places? And what are the significant, important places for them? Like what kind of things happen in those places where people make pilgrimage? People go to see and make prayers and worship. It's kind of like if you're Catholic and you really want to know about Catholicism, you have to visit the Vatican, right? You have to go to Italy, basically, and see how Catholicism is practiced there, or Roman Catholic, I should say. Um, so like that. So, but I was saying in Sri Lanka, yeah, every Buddhist temple you go to, you see, yes, of course, there's a statue, main statues of Shakyamuni Buddha at the center, and then there might be a statue of Maitreya off to the side. Sometimes some other, Buddhist deities there also. Some Shariputra, Moggallana was there. But usually on one side or even outside, out the back, there's a little spirit house for local spirits, which has like Vishnu or Brahma or what's the one with Ganesha, or other even just local spirits that they also make offer, and there'll be some little food and flowers and incense offerings made there also. So it's not only the Tibetans that worship like local spirits or other deities that are not really Buddhist, asking for their help in world kind of more worldly success. Like if you need rain to come on time, or want crops to grow, or want to no problems with neighboring landowners or something like that, you need worldly things for Buddhist practice to go well. So yeah, and that's common throughout Asia. When I was a student in university in Indonesia. Like people even have spirits for the kitchen, and then a spirit for the yard, and then there's tree spirits and water spirits and the mountain spirits, and it's just something it's common throughout Asia that people believe different aspects of the environment are inhabited by different kinds of beings, and it's important to stay on good terms with those. Otherwise, harm can come. They can harm us, right? So Tibet is no different in that way, although they really take it to another level. I have to say, in a way. No, one thing I think of, like among the Tibetans, you don't see in other Buddhist places, is like this whole thing of, what do they call kuden? Kuden is what's the English term for like nejung, oracles, oracles, yeah, oracles is something. I mean, even when I was in Indonesia, there are people that go into trance. They invite like spirits to inhabit their body, and they go into trance, and then they'll do things like eat glass, like eat broken glass and metal, and walk on fire and stuff like that. um, but so there are oracle, I mean, if you can call that an oracle, I'm not sure. But in Tibetan Buddhism, they have these like two of the main protectors of the Tibetan government are Nejung and Gandong, which are powerful spirits who reside in Tibet, and they were converted by like Guru Rinpoche, I believe, or some later Buddhist master, and they're regularly invited to inhabit the body of a particular people who go into trance, and then the different Buddhist masters and the Tibetan government communicate with them and ask advice for them about what to do. Like when His Holiness Dalai Lama, I mean, one of the most famous advice, I think it was Nejung Oracle gave. I mean, even that happens every year now, right? It's a yearly thing. But was in 1959 when the Chinese military had occupied Lhasa, and there was a danger, yeah, that some big violence would happen, some big kind of violent conflict would erupt. then His Holiness asked one of these oracles, Nejong, for advice, and Nejong told him, leave tonight, or else, like, your life is in danger. So he left that night, and the next day, this big kind of I don't know what you call it. Violent conflict arose, and the Chinese bombed his massacre, and the Chinese bombed His Holiness Summer Palace. So he likely would have been killed if he hadn't gone. The microphone. Yes.
When Buddhism was in India, I'm sure the Indians were doing this kind of like appeasing of the local and landlords and spirits and yeah.
Probably, yeah. It's just it's so long ago. It's not. We don't. I mean, I haven't seen direct evidence, but probably. I mean, because that's such a part of Indian culture.
Yes.
Fully to this day. To this day, it's part of.
I grew up in South Africa, and it was even in South Africa. Indians do that where they before prayer you appease the local spirits and all of those things.
Yeah.
So I would think it's not so divorced from Buddhism that there's some awareness of it there, and that just got transferred to Tibet as well.
And even in the Buddhist sutras, you see different local deities appearing and like asking the Buddha for advice, and the Buddha were giving advice and talking about and local deities. Yeah. Even like Buddhist monks have a vow not to dig the earth or not to cut branches from trees or something for no reason, because it might upset local spirits or harm them, right, in different ways. Or pollute bodies of water for that reason. Not just for other people to use, but also because there's considered there's beings, others like spirit beings that inhabit or the owner of that. They consider themselves the owner of that, and they'll be upset by that. And then if they're upset, they'll harm people. Yeah. So yeah, that's there. But you can imagine, anyway. Well, I mean, part of that discussion, part of the reason His Holiness makes that point so much that because there was a misrepresentation by early Buddhist scholars in the West, right? Yeah. No, His Holiness' main point was that the Tibetan Buddhism as it exists is not something like made up by the Tibetans. There's not a lot of things added by the Tibetans that was not originally there. But actually, it's a very authentic preservation, actually compared to the traditions in the Theravada or the Chinese, like of the full breadth of Buddhism at its height in ancient India, right? Because that's another, I mean, a big difference with Tibetan Buddhism, and this is one reason this misconception arose, is because it was transmitted from ancient India, the North India, where it flourished, at kind of the height of it, at the peak of its development in northern India, to Tibet, because there was a lot of people going back and forth over hundreds of years between Tibet and India, whereas China is very far away, right? So the interaction is much less. And then Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand also further away, and also their view of what is real Buddhism was much narrower, right? So the whole tradition of Mahayana Buddhism, as it existed in ancient India, they didn't accept much of that as being authentic. They asserted that it's something made up later on, right? And that was a division that happened very early on, in like 300 to 400 years after the Buddha passed away. There was this division between the Mahasamgika, which became basically Mahayana Buddhism, and the Theravada, the elders, right? Yeah. And so, yeah. And then, I mean, but it's not only, so there's two main facets of Buddhism that existed at the peak of the development of Buddhism in ancient India that almost not at all or very little went to the Theravada or Chinese Buddhism. One is the Buddhist logic, right? And the works of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, and the emphasis on using reasoning and logic to logically establish, independent of just quoting, just saying, oh, the Buddha said this, or Shariputra said this, Mogana said this, so-and-so said this, but just looking logically, like how can we establish, just objectively looking at this assertion by the Buddha, are there past and future lives? Is it possible to end suffering in such a way that it never returns, right, in one's own continuum? Is it possible to, to take rebirth in a pure land? Is it possible to become fully enlightened? So just looking at those things objectively, and then using logic and reasoning to establish, is that true or not, right? So this kind of approach to Buddhism is primarily based on the works of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, and those were not widely known or widely studied ever in Theravada Buddhism or Chinese Buddhism. But in Tibet, they were known and studied. Um, yeah, and then Tantra, and so all the different lineages of Buddhist Tantra. So Tantra is kind of a whole movement of spiritual practice common to both Buddhism and Hinduism that arose. Jainism, I don't know, but that arose in ancient India, kind of at the same time. Probably from, say, maybe like, well, I mean, yeah, it's difficult to say, but from 500 AD, about 500 to 1000 AD in that period, or CE. Although, yeah, my dates are not good. My history is not so good. But because one of the first Buddhist masters to come to Tibet, which is about 700 CE, was Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, who was a great tantric yogi, great tantric master. But yeah, there's this big debate in Buddhism about whether Tantra is actually something that the Buddha taught or not, right? So, like the Tibetans will say yes, like Buddhism was no question was taught by the Buddha, and they consider all these different tantric teachings, the root tantras, to be the word of the Buddha, and like His Holiness gives several different reasons for that. One of the main ones is because these ancient Buddhist masters like Nagarjuna and Aryadeva, like Aryadeva lived about 600 years after the Buddha passed away. Then Chandrakirti, I mean, they're impeccable masters of Buddhism, right? And familiar with all the sutras and all the teachings of the Buddha. And they consider the Tantra to be authentic teaching of the Buddha because they themselves wrote commentaries, extensive commentaries on the Buddhist Tantras. So one is to trust their word. But then from the side of logic and reasoning, the main reason His Holiness gives that the Buddhist Tantras are actually a teaching of the Buddha is because it makes sense. Because in the sutras, you can clearly see that the Buddha did teach a state of full enlightenment, which is something beyond just nirvana, that's just freedom from samsara, right? That's what we discussed yesterday. And so what are the qualities of a fully enlightened being are mainly the four bodies, right? Mainly you can say their enlightened body and their enlightened mind, right? And especially their enlightened body, is an aspect, the aspect of them that appears to others, right? But it's not subject to suffering, right? It's not subject to ordinary birth, old age, sickness, and death. Although they show in different forms, they show those aspects. It's not, they don't experience suffering. So the big question is, well, how to establish an enlightened form like that? That's not, in a way, it's like not produced from cells and blood and bones. It's an emanated form, right? So, but how is that produced? That's not explained in any of the sutras, right? Although it's asserted in the sutras that the Buddha has four bodies. So the two form bodies are the emanation body and the enjoyment body. And then they're called two truth bodies, which is mainly to do with the Buddha's mind, is the wisdom truth body, is the actual mind itself. And then the mind's emptiness of inherent existence is the nature truth body. So His Holiness makes the point that it's only by studying the Tantras that you can understand how an ordinary being like us can achieve the four bodies of a Buddha, and especially the form body. Because you look at our form body is this ordinary physical body we have. It's made up of blood and bones and cells, and it's when we die it becomes a corpse, right? So clearly that doesn't become enlightened. That doesn't go to the state of enlightenment. We can more easily see how our mind, and imagine how our mind can go to the state of enlightenment, but then what kind of physical form do you have? And there's no explanation of that in the sutras. So it's only in dependence upon the tantras that one can fully understand like what an enlightened being is and how they can achieve an enlightened body, an enlightened physical form. Yeah. And then also, the reasoning, just, by reasoning and logic, you look at what the sutras are teaching and you can see that it totally fits with the Buddha's teachings of the Four Noble Truths. Um, yeah. And the Bodhisattva path and the way to perfectly use all of one's body and mind to benefit other sentient beings, right? And only in dependence upon Tantra can you understand many things that appear in the sutra, like a pure land, or how Buddhas can appear in different forms in different places at the same time, and so forth. Well, these kind of miraculous things that look miraculous in the sutras, you study the Tantras, and it kind of gives the underlying understanding that makes all those things kind of seem possible. Yes, we've been going an hour now, so I've been going an hour. You've been sitting there for an hour. Um, yeah. But any questions? Gosh, I didn't think this would take so long to talk about. I wasn't planning to speak about Tibetan Buddhism so much. Anyway, any questions about, this different schools of Buddhism we were discussing yesterday, or Tibetan Buddhism in particular? Yes.
So, oh,
Thank you, Geshe. I was wondering, when Atisha went to, I guess, kind of Sumatra, maybe present day Sumatra.
Sumatra, yeah.
I was just wondering, when he studied with Sir Lingpa, do we know anything about like Sir Lingpa's lineage? Because that's quite a distance
Mm-hmm.
from northern India. But
Yeah. Yeah, so Stephen's asking about one of those last great Indian Buddhist masters to go to Tibet. His name is Atisha, mentioned earlier. So earlier in Atisha's life, Atisha had famously gone to probably current day Sumatra, because Buddhism was widespread in current day Indonesia before. One of the largest Buddhist monuments in the world is in Java, in central Java, Borobudur. Um, but yeah, apparently Atisha went to Sumatra to study with one Indonesian Buddhist master named Ser Lingpa. And so why did he go there? Specifically to receive a transmission of the lineage of, it seems, of bodhicitta, the lineage of equalizing and exchanging self and others, of bodhicitta. And it seems maybe also the Bodhisattva's way of life by Shantideva. Maybe he had the transmission of that, and nobody else in India had at that time. That's one explanation I heard recently. But it seems that, especially because Ser Lingpa was a great master of this, because there's two lineages of methods to develop bodhicitta. One is the sevenfold cause and effect method, and then the other is equalizing and exchanging self and others. So it seems primarily to receive instruction in that equalizing and exchanging self and others method of bodhicitta, and maybe also to receive the transmissions of these two main texts by Shantideva, the Bodhisattva's Way of Life and the Compendium of Trainings. That seems to be the main reason. Although, yeah, the details about Atisha's life, they're a bit sketchy. Yeah. It's not 100% known why he went. Asha, did you have a question, or any of you online? Beth or Margaret or Lindsay? Any questions?
I don't have any.
Okay.
I'm a bit embarrassed to ask this question being Indian,
Mm.
but Nalanda University that you speak about, that a lot of teachers studied there, Hindu and Buddhist, like who formed it and just some history.
Who formed the monastery? I don't know. I've never heard that. But yeah, Nalanda University in ancient India, the ruins are still, are a national archaeological site now. It's near Patna and Gaya. Yeah, basically near Patna, you can say, in current day India. And there's, quite some big ruins there. a lot because they built, everything was built out of bricks, fired bricks, and they built really thick walls. Like, I'm not even sure, probably at least as wide as my arm span, if not thicker, the walls, and very narrow cells. So you can see where they had temples, and then surrounded by kind of like dormitory buildings. And then, but apparently, I mean, they're most famous for their library. It said, I mean, it took 6 months for the library to burn. That it was a huge library that was burned by the Mughal invaders. Um, yeah, but it's not. I'm not. There's no mention of like who was the founder of Nalanda University. Um, yeah, I mean the three major centers of learning in ancient Buddhist India were Nalanda was the foremost, and then Takshashila in current day Pakistan, in like the Peshawar Valley in Pakistan, and then Vikramashila, which is more towards Bengal, um, West Bengal. Those are the three major centers of learning. Yeah, and some Tibetans, like one of the early Tibetan Buddhist masters was named Lotsawa Rinchen Zangpo. His teachers were primarily from Kashmir, Kashmiri Pandits. Um, and so he went to like Takshashila in Kashmir to study with masters there. Whereas Atisha was from more like Vikramashila, more Bengal side. And then like, then most of others were from more central northern India, around in current day Bihar kind of area. Yeah. Okay, so the next topic is well, how do, as an individual practitioner, how do we navigate all this, these different schools of Buddhism? Mainly it's like you kind of take samples from each one, try out each one and see which one is most appealing for you, right? I mean, and on one hand, some people might easily think, oh, it's kind of a shame that Buddhism has become so diverse. Now it's not like as if, in the past it was just kind of one homogeneous, pure thing. And so it becoming kind of so diversified now is a degeneration. But I think Buddhists don't really look at it like that. Actually, quite the opposite in a way, because even during Buddha's life, he gave very diverse teachings, right? And this is another, argument for why the Mahayana is actual, the word of the Mahayana Sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, are actually the word of the Buddha, and also the Tantra could have actually been taught by Buddha. Because, I mean, for us, it's very difficult to imagine like what an enlightened being is like, It's kind of like if we have a cat or dog, it's difficult for them to imagine what our life is like. Now, they don't have the mental capacity to understand, like, why sometimes, whatever, we treat them certain ways. Yeah. They just can't understand our life. So like that, it's very difficult for us to imagine like what it's like to be an enlightened being. But definitely they have all kinds of perception of things that we don't perceive, awareness of things that we're not aware of, and capacity to do things that it's just difficult for us to imagine. And so even in Shakyamuni Buddha's lifetime, he taught different things to different people in different places according to their needs, right? Because think, a Buddha, I mean, at the essence of an enlightened being is compassion, is caring about others, is using all of their energy, all of their capacity, their life to benefit others in whatever way is most beneficial for those people. So because people have very different dispositions, so the Buddhists teach, Shakyamuni Buddha taught very different things to different people at different times and appeared in different ways. And even, and here's where it related more to Tantra, is even taught not only ordinary human beings that we can see, but also taught animals. Like even in the Pali Sutras, it appears that the Buddha, because sometimes he would meditate alone in a forest, and at one time, meditating alone in a forest, there was a herd of elephants nearby, and elephants is a matriarchy. And so he learned to recognize the call of the eldest female elephants and the herd, and then learned to actually replicate that call. So he could use that call. So there's one famous story from the Buddha's life where the Buddha's cousin Devdat colluded with the Ajatasattu, this kind of evil king, who later became a Buddhist disciple. And they tried several different times to assassinate the Buddha so that Devdat himself could become the leader of the Buddhist order. And one way they tried to kill was because Ajatasattu had war elephants, big, strong elephant bulls. And so he had Ajatasattu give one of the elephants like a lot of alcohol so it was drunk, and then like probably beat it or something and make it all riled up, and then send it out on the street at a time when the Buddha was coming to beg for alms. So this elephant, this drunk, kind of enraged elephant, was coming, like charging down the street towards the Buddha, and the Buddha just, everyone else was like running, for their lives, and the Buddha just walked calmly, and he gave out this roar of a female elephant. I don't know, there must be a better term for a female elephant, but the head of he gave out this kind of roar, and then the bull elephant was totally surprised, and subdued, and became subdued, and actually, totally subdued by that. So, I mean, this is just one example of how, the Buddha would use his ability to, even speak to the animals. So also then to spirits and gods and beings in different realms, basically, that we can't see. So it said the tantras that the Buddha didn't teach to ordinary human beings, but to more beings in a deva realm. Also the perfection of wisdom sutras. And then those teachings only later appeared in the human realm, because different humans with high level of realization receive those teachings from beings in other realms and then put them into writing. Yeah. So, why are we talking about that? Oh, my main point was so as an individual practitioner, how to look at these different teachings. So just like the Buddha himself gave radically different teachings during his lifetime according to the needs of different groups of people that he was teaching. Similarly, now, and that's beneficial, right? So similarly now, we should feel it's actually very fortunate that we have access to with ease, because say, 500 years ago, or even just 200 years ago, if you're born in the United States, you have no access to any Buddhism because it's all far away. If you're born in China, you have access to Chinese Buddhism, but not others. If you're born in Thailand, you have access to Theravada Buddhism, but not others. But now, we have access to everything in the world, right? So, in the one hand, it makes things more confusing, but on the other hand, it's a real opportunity. So, but the way to approach it, I think, is just try. Go if you're new to Buddhism and you're looking to see what suits your disposition. So go to receive teachings in a Theravada tradition. Do a retreat in a Theravada, like insight meditation here in this area is more influenced by the Theravada background. There's also many Zen, like San Francisco Zen Center. Go do some retreats there. Take some courses there. See how does that appeal to you. And then if you're interested in Tibetan Buddhism or different schools of Tibetan Buddhism, try out, different things and see what appeals to you. But gradually, it's good to be more clear about which one seems most beneficial for you, right? There's no size that fits all. But then focus on that one. Once you identify one that you feel is most beneficial for you, for a time, at least 5 years or maybe 10 years, just focus on one school and become a master of that, right? Not like a master, like you become famous and you write books and teaching other people, but just like you've received kind of the full transmission in that lineage. You've received kind of the full explanation and have had a good taste of the different ways of practice, and you feel very competent in that. And then you're grounded in one tradition. And then if you'd like to add things from other traditions, then do that. But right from the beginning, don't, at the beginning, taste the different ones, but then decide on one that you feel is best for you, and then focus on that one for a while. Don't just keep mixing things from different ones, because then you'll just be really confused and you end up with a hodgepodge kind of practice. So that's the typical advice given. And maybe also just to give you a bit insight, like, well, what kind of these different lineages, they appeal to who? Who do they appeal to more differently? Um, Basically, I mean, for people who like simplicity, definitely the Theravada or Zen is better, right? They both have a much more streamlined, like, I don't want to say simplistic, not in a derogatory way, but just a kind of, I don't know, what do you say? A more minimalistic. I mean, Zen, the aesthetic itself is very minimalistic, right? It's just like, just sit, focus on the mind, focus on, try to understand the nature of reality, but in a way of a very kind of ascetic way, very, a lot of silent sitting, and what do you say? Not a lot of prayer, not a lot of explanation, and then explanation there is, it's very, I think you can say, like, well, cryptic, yeah, it can be cryptic in the koan tradition, but also improvisational, very in the moment, just speaking what appears to the mind, the master. And it's very much like about the direct transmission from the experience of the master to the experience of the student. And there's not so much space for, like, a lot of intellectual explanation and like question and answer and um, um, yeah, and textual explanation and reading, engaging with different texts and things like that. Like, that's not so much there. It's very much streamlined, focused on just generating some kind of experience through a kind of a bit very simple, direct sort of practice. And then the Theravada also is quite, I mean, compared to Tibetan Buddhism, it's much simpler, but the emphasis is much more on like very pure morality, practicing, abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, then also more prayer and reading the sutras, reciting sutras, reading sutras. So in the Theravada tradition, they very much go back to the Pali Canon again and again. And there's amazing scholarship, about the Pali Canon. The entire Pali Canon has been translated in English and many other languages like long ago. And there's, yeah, but the emphasis also very much on meditation, but more on placement meditation, like watching the breath, right? Slow walking, watching the breath, and then also watching the mind. Yeah, and not. I mean, there are. Many Dharma talks, and very much. I mean, here's another difference. Like in the Zen tradition, because it comes from Japan, in Japan there's no real monastic order. There are people who wear robes, like Zen priests, but they're not actually ordained Buddhist monks and nuns because they don't have vow of celibacy, right? They don't have, yeah, anyway. So it's very much a lay tradition. Like especially in Zen Buddhism in America, it's very much like a lay community, a lay sangha. Whereas the Theravada is very much like an ordained sangha. Like ordained sangha, like real monks and nuns, is very much at the center of that tradition. And this relationship between the lay community and the ordained sangha, where the ordained sangha are the teachers and the exemplars, and the lay community are their supporters. And so practicing dana, so making offerings to and supporting the ordained sangha as the upholders of the Buddhist tradition, is very strong in the Theravada tradition. So if that's something that appeals to you, then that, that would be better for you, right? Yeah, and then yeah, maybe I should also add, because because the Chinese tradition has the Zen and then Pure Land. Pure Land is not so widespread in the U.S., but there are some. There's like the Land of 1,000 Buddhas is a monastic community just north of near Sacramento, I think. Yeah. Well, there's monasticism is very strong, and reciting sutras, reciting the names of mantras and the names of Buddhas, and praying to take rebirth in a Pure Land is very strong in that tradition. So it's a different style of practice. And then in Tibetan Buddhism is like, I don't know, it's kind of difficult. It's got like many different facets. Like it's got all different things going on. But the emphasis is very much compassion. the practice of compassion, understanding your own suffering, understanding the suffering of others, and then using your life in an effective way to free yourself and others from compassion. And I mean, also that has to do with the historical relationship between the Tibetan people and the Buddha of compassion, right? And the office of the Dalai Lama, who's considered the Buddha of compassion. But I mean, that's how I first took interest in Tibetan tradition, was because, yeah, I found kind of Zen and Theravada practice a little bit kind of stale for my mind. Not, I don't know, it seemed like I had a lot of emotions that are not really like addressed by that. And I just felt very compassionate also. And that I felt like that wasn't really cultivated in those. So some friends, people I met in Thailand suggested I check out Tibetan Buddhism because it has this emphasis on cultivating compassion and living with compassion. But then also in Tibetan Buddhism, if you can't tell from this course already, like there's a lot of explanation, right? Right? There's just emphasis on generating a full conceptual understanding of things. Practice. So there's this idea that we should understand the full breadth of Buddhist teachings in order to know, to kind of feel comfortable in knowing what we're doing. Like, why are we watching the breath? Why are we trying to generate single-pointed concentration? Why do we practice dana and practice generosity? What's the point of there being ordained sangha? Like, so there's an emphasis on having an understanding of the full breadth of the entirety of the Buddhist teachings, and then practicing within that. And so that's one thing personally. I mean, I'm just someone who likes to think a lot. I like to think about a lot of things. I like to ask a lot of questions. I like to have a broad understanding of like if I, when I took a class in school or college, I want to know, well, like, what's the point of studying this at all first before you tell me anything about it? Like, I need to know why. And so I also found that like a bit difficult. And the Zen tradition, there's a lot of good explanation. The Theravada tradition, I found really, like, not that there's not a lot of good explanation, but when you're practicing under a teacher, at least the teachers I encountered, they don't want to explain a lot. They just want you to do the practice and get experience with that, which there are benefits to that style of practicing. But for me, it just didn't fit well. Whereas when I came to Tibetan Buddhist courses, and you can ask all the questions you want, and every question you ask, they have really good explanations, like related to each question. I was like, oh, this is like seventh heaven for me. So again, it depends on your disposition. I know many people, they come to Tibetan Buddhism and they like aspects of it, but then they find it all a bit too overwhelming. Like there's just too much going on. How do you decide what to practice? And then also they find the whole presence of this kind of tantric practices that are for hire. You're not introduced to those, and you shouldn't, be involved with those until you're well grounded in like renunciation, in compassion and bodhicitta, and in understanding of emptiness. But still, that's looming there in the background. So, people who are older students, people who've been training in that system longer, they're all practicing like tantra, and so that makes some people uncomfortable. Like, and yeah, tantra has a bit of, because it is something that can easily be misunderstood and easily be misused and lead to problems in a person's practice. Then there is a kind of veil of secrecy around tantra in order to protect people from misunderstanding and from generating wrong ideas and engaging in practices that actually become harmful to them because they're misusing it. So some people are quite uncomfortable with that aspect, that there's this kind of secret kind of level of teachings. So yeah, for different reasons, Tibetan Buddhism definitely not for some people, right? Just depends on your own disposition. And then there's the whole aspect of karma. Depends upon your karma. Like, why do we have the disposition that we have? Well, because in past lives we had connection with such and such people or such and such teachers or such and such teachings. And so in this life, we have this kind of natural, ease of connecting with some lineage and not with others. And that also, but that's part of checking out, attending teachings and retreats and practices led by different teachers and different communities, that's the way of seeing what kind of karma you have. How does that, how do you relate to that? What does that cause to arise in your mind? Does it cause inspiration, or does it cause kind of wariness to arise in your mind? That's an indication of what you have a karmic connection with and what you don't, right? And so we also just have to be aware of that. So yeah, Casey's asking, what if you have a karmic connection to more than one? Yeah, then you just practice in relation to more than one. That's okay. Yeah. Keep it straightforward, simple. Okay, unless there's any questions about then we'll take okay, one question. Yes.
There is Vajrayana also.
Vajrayana,
is that?
Tantrayana is the same. They're synonyms. Tantra, Vajrayana. Yeah. Okay, so these terms.
But Mahayana and Vajrayana, are they different or are they same?
Vajrayana is a subset of Mahayana. Yeah. So, and I mean, there's this other term which I'm avoiding using because the Theravada consider it quite derogatory, so don't use it. But Hinayana, right? There's also Hinayana. So Hina means lower. Yana means vehicle, right? So in Buddhism, you'll come across these terms. The Hinayana, Mahayana, and then Vajrayana. Yana always means vehicle. So here it means a vehicle. It's like a path, like something that takes you from your ordinary state to the state of liberation from samsara, or to the state of full enlightenment, right? So the term Hinayana, Hina means lower. So it means a lower vehicle. So that's kind of it's a term applied from the perspective of Mahayana practitioners to those who practice basically the Theravada, in the Theravada tradition. Because in the Theravada tradition, which is true, that the main aim, and maybe because that's all that's considered possible for most people, the main aim is just to be free from suffering for oneself, right? So is extract oneself from the suffering of samsara, right? And so from the perspective of Mahayana, where in Mahayana, the main aim is to not just be free from samsara oneself, but to use one's lives to benefit others as much as possible. So the focus is primarily on others, altruistic, right? And to achieve full enlightenment, because according to the Mahayana schools, it's considered that everybody has a potential for full enlightenment, which is not the case in the Theravada. And so the aim is that one should try to become fully enlightened in order to be of the greatest benefit to others, right? So from that perspective, this narrower motivation in the Theravada is considered lower. And so they came up with this term, the lower vehicle, Hinayana vehicle. But people find that deeply offensive in Theravada countries, understandably. And so we don't use that term anymore, but you'll come across it still. Then Mahayana is called great. Maha means great, right? Like Mahatma Gandhi means the great Atma, yeah, the great being, right? Yeah. So like Maha means great. So Mahayana means the great vehicle. And it's called great because of the scope of the motivation. The scope is not just for oneself to achieve freedom from suffering, but rather it's in order to benefit all beings, then I must achieve enlightenment. So the motivation is much more vast. So that's why it's called great. And then in order to actualize full enlightenment, there's a big vast body of practices, right? This is the whole collection of different practices one engaged in is much more vast, and the view is vast. But it's mainly from the perspective of the motivation. Now, if one practices Tantra, there's also Tantrayana, Vajrayana, which is synonyms. The Vajra vehicle, Vajra means like indestructible, or lightning bolt, or there's a particular symbol called the Vajra. But it's the vehicle, it's like, a literal way to translate it would be like the indestructible vehicle. But the idea is that, without going too much into like what the indestructible means, basically it's referring to the pure nature of our mind, and especially the mind realizing emptiness. That once the most pure level of the mind, most subtle level of the mind realizes emptiness and then abandons all obscurations, that state is indestructible, right? And that's what becomes enlightened. That's why it's possible to become enlightened in a way that you can never fall back from that. And so the vehicle that most quickly leads to that indestructible state of enlightenment is called the Vajrayana. I mean, roughly you could say like that. But the motivation is still the same as bodhicitta. The motivation is to benefit all sentient beings. So that's why it's within the Mahayana. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche made a very strong point again and again. Like we should never say just Vajrayana on its own, as if it's something separate. Actually, I saw a YouTube video recently where they say, this video, they're going to explain the difference between, I think they said the Theravada, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, as if the Vajrayana is something other than the Mahayana, which is a total mistake. So I wrote a comment there explaining that. I don't write comments very often on YouTube or anywhere. But yeah, but that's why the Vajrayana is part of the Mahayana. And maybe just to, add a bit more, like, well, how is it different from the rest of the Vajrayana, from the rest of the Mahayana? Is because in the Vajrayana practice, basically there's something called deity yoga, where a person is like, a synonym for the Vajrayana is the resultant vehicle, or taking the result into the path. So basically it's that you, instead of practicing from the perspective of, oh, I'm an ordinary being with all kinds of flaws and mistakes, and enlightenment is up there at the top of the mountain, and I'm struggling to like climb the side of this mountain and get up there, right? Basically, it's like you try to, as much as you can, separate your identity from, you separate yourself from identifying with all your faults and limitations, and rather you identify with the full manifestation of your enlightened potential. Right? So you take the result, you identify with the result, and practice from within that kind of way of seeing oneself and way of seeing others. And that thereby you most quickly actualize that result. So it's kind of based on the idea that one of the largest obstacles we have is identifying with our own limitations and flaws, right? So we need to just throw that out and identify with our own enlightened potential. And thereby we can much more quickly actualize that potential. Okay, so now let's take a 10-minute break. Okay, let's continue. Lindsay, Margaret, Beth, did you have anything you want to hear about particularly? This is our last session between now and 1:30. The plan is to go over the Four Noble Truths now. The Buddha's first teaching.
There was, I don't know, maybe Joseph Goldstein was saying in one of his speeches, there was some speech where as soon as that was delivered by the Buddha, a lot of the audience were enlightened. I don't know.
Well,
if it was
and
just
be
one.
careful to use enlightened too, like not enlightened.
No.
No, because the Buddha didn't, there was no sutra where the Buddha taught and suddenly like a lot of people become enlightened, but they do gain different levels of realization.
Realization.
Like some
You did
achieve the
mention
state of an arhat,
Yeah, but-
is like a freedom, they achieve nirvana, freedom from samsara. But more common is like the state of an arya. They have a direct perception of emptiness. And then even the lower levels of realization are more and more common. You go, some like stream enterer is an initial level of realization where it generates single pointed concentration and a conceptual understanding of emptiness. So yeah, that you see in the sutras a lot, in the Pali canon, the Mahayana canon. Yeah. So so Shakyamuni Buddha became enlightened at about the age of 36. And then he was said to have just stayed in meditation and around the Bodhi tree, under and around the Bodhi tree for 49 days, living there. And it's said that the Buddha at first thought, like, no one will understand this path that I've discovered, this path to enlightenment and liberation from samsara that I've discovered. But then some devas came and requested him to teach. They said that there's some people who understand that you should teach, that requested him to teach. So this is actually this scene where the Buddha is showing the aspect of kind of thinking that there's no one who will understand what I have to teach, and so sort of deciding not to teach. And then some devas coming and requesting him to teach. That sets a very strong precedent in Buddhism that exists till now, where typically Buddhist teachers or people in Buddhism who have, understanding and qualities and ability to teach others, they don't teach. They don't voluntarily just go out and organize teachings themselves and just go teach people. But rather they have to be requested before they'll give any teaching. And even when they're requested, it's not like then they just start teaching everything they know, right? They have to be requested for specific teachings, like again and again. So and the thinking there is that, unless there's an interest from the side of people who want to learn, then there's no point explaining things to them, because it won't benefit them, right? Even if there's a desire from the side of someone who has the ability to teach, if there's no interest from the side of people who want to learn, then there's no, it's like, I don't know, it's like if you have a potted plant outside and it's just rained and the pot's full of water, there's no point putting water on it anymore, right? There has to be, the soil has to be dry, and then you put water on it and the soil sucks up the water like it loves it, right? So like that, there has to be, in the minds of people, there has to be some desire for learning, to be able to receive a teaching. So so that precedent is very strong in Buddhism, and you'll find that throughout the Buddhist world, that teachers don't easily give teachings, and even it's kind of like out of respect for the Buddhist teachings, then many teachers, even they're asked to teach, they won't easily accept. Even they're asked again and again, they want to check out the sincerity of the students. Some are more strict about this, and some are more easygoing about this. In the Western Buddhist scene, you see it's become very easygoing. But in the Tibetan and more traditional, I think Zen and Theravada kind of Buddhist areas, culture, it's more strict. No, many teachers who are really the most capable teachers, they don't have many students. They don't give many teachings because they won't easily just teach to people who they feel like don't really have a genuine interest or a really pure motivation for wanting to learn. If they suspect that the students just want to learn so that then they can go tell other people, oh, I studied with this master, and then they want to start an online course and then charge for it and make money or something, then they won't teach, right? But you see that's a big danger in Buddhism as it's spreading to the West, especially the United States, is that people, using their understanding of Buddhism, they're doing some retreats, studying with some famous masters, receiving some particular lineage, and then using that to make money. That's also very taboo in the Buddhist culture, to use like a meditation, teaching meditation or something to make money. Traditionally in Asia, like you think during the Buddha's lifetime, how did teachings first occur? Was either someone would just approach the Buddha and ask questions, and then he would teach. But oftentimes, a family would invite the Buddha and his Sangha to their house, and often wealthy families, because there's oftentimes a large Sangha, but to their house for a meal, and they would offer a meal. And then after the meal, the Buddha would they would ask some questions, and the Buddha would give a Dharma talk. That's very classical setting for a Buddhist teaching. But what that means is that that family who invited the Sangha for a meal, they're the patrons, de facto. They're the patrons who are, offering a venue, a space, and also refreshment, for people to enjoy a teaching. And then where was the Buddha and the Sangha staying? Well, they were also staying on property that was also offered by someone, usually wealthy merchants or rulers in an area, or just, a family that had property, whoever. They would offer the Buddha and the Sangha. They were beggars. They weren't working for money. Like, they were living in a space. And so the spaces where Buddha taught were something offering those. So now in the West, it's like most people, if we were to organize like a Dharma teaching in like Sanborn County Park, I'm not even sure it's legal, first of all. And then, and then if it's just on the grass, under a tree, like half the people are not going to be comfortable like that. No? So, and if it's hot and there's mosquitoes and then there's whatever. So, these days in the West, people, they need a comfortable space. So we have to rent facilities. And then people also want refreshments, so we have refreshments. And then we also have to have online. We want to make it available since the pandemic, online. And so there's all kinds of expenses involved in hosting Buddhist teachings. And that's why for a course like this, like we have to charge something because there aren't like, and also, I don't know, whatever, just maybe, I don't know, maybe in Buddha's time there was greater concentration of wealth. I mean, more wealth and inequality. It's hard to imagine more than now, but I think also a big difference, like in the Buddhist time, there weren't like sports leagues. There's not like, no TV, no radio. There's not a lot of other diversion, and spirituality was at the center of most people's lives. It was like a center, focal point of culture, right, and of society. Like you think about the cathedrals in Europe, like that must have been the thing to do, was like offer money for the construction of a cathedral. Otherwise, how could a small city have such an elaborate thing, right? So I think also like spirituality in ancient India was like the thing to do. So naturally, whereas now it's not like that. Now we have 1,000,001 things to do, and spirituality is like, it's like the fries on the side. It's not the center of things. So also it's not like some people sometimes think, a Buddhist center like this, they have big benefactors that, that just provide for everything, or the organization they're part of has wealthy benefactors that provide, but it's not like that. Like most centers, they're struggling to pay the bills. They're struggling to get by. So that's why we have to charge for courses like this. We try to, like most centers, we try to make everything by donation. So we don't want it to be that because someone can't pay, they cannot participate. Absolutely don't want that to be the case. Like it should be, and that's a very important part of Buddhist culture and Buddhist tradition. And it's not only Buddhism. I was thinking this morning about like churches. Like I've never been to a church where you're asked to like pay something to come to mass, right? There's no fee to like attend a mass or something. But it's different. But the culture is such that, like, I grew up in going to Catholic church, like everybody gives. Like there's this kind of underlying expectation that you should give about 10% of your earnings. Or if not that, maybe 5%, or at least 1%. Like I remember my parents writing out a check like every Sunday, and they put in the basket, a basket comes around, and everybody puts something in the basket, right? And that's how things are paid for. So yeah, Dharma Center here, we don't pass around a basket, but yeah, we have a donation box, and then we request donations for things like this. But the reason I'm explaining this is because just to understand more about this kind of Buddhist traditions, but coming from, this discussion came from thinking about the Shakyamuni Buddha giving his first teaching. And then this precedent around, teachings aren't given unless they're requested, and teachings are not charged for. It shouldn't be something that charged for. And that's a big danger, I think, you see in Western culture, especially in American culture, is people more and more charging for Dharma things, and there being no, free option. Like I find it always kind of breaks my heart when I see, even some Buddhist publishing houses publish, translations of great Buddhist texts, and you can't see that text unless you pay $50, like, to get it. Like, it's a real shame. It's unprecedented. It's not totally unprecedented, like, but in the Tibetan world now, like Tibetan, I mean, because mostly I read Buddhist texts in Tibetan in the past. Now I'm reading more English, but everything's for free, more or less, or it's just the cost of production. Like, there's no profit involved. Nobody would charge. But now everything's for free. They put all these texts in Tibetan just on PDFs you can download, online for free, no copyright, that way. And I think that's the best. Now, I often think if there was some really wealthy person, asked me like, well, how can I help the Dharma to spread in the West? I would be like, buy all the copyrights of all the translations of all the Dharma text and make them available for free, for people to download. It would help so many people. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. So the first teaching that the Buddha gave is, he gave about 2 months after he was enlightened. And so after he was requested to teach by these gods, it said, then he, with his clairvoyance, he scanned the world to see who were the most suitable recipients of the explanation of the path I've discovered that I have to give. And he saw that these 5 ascetics that he'd practiced meditation with for 6 years earlier, on the banks of the Narayana, they were the most receptacle. They could most easily and quickly gain insight and to see the truth of what he'd realized. So then he went to where they were staying, near Varanasi, in a place where meditators would stay, called the Deer Park, which is land of the king there. Anyway, so the Buddha, I won't go into the details of the story, but anyway, he went there, and they requested him to. They could see, that he had developed some profound realization and qualities of body and mind, and then they requested him to tell them about what he'd discovered. And then this first teaching he gave was of the 4. It's called the 4 Noble Truths. Another way to translate it is the 4 truths of the noble ones. And so here, what is noble? Noble is actually a translation of Arya, the Sanskrit term, Arya being. And in the Buddhist teachings, an Arya being is a being who has had direct realization of emptiness, primarily, of selflessness. Means a non-conceptual direct experience of the ultimate nature of all phenomena. And together with that, a direct experience of the 4 Noble Truths, right? So that's why they're called the 4 Truths of the Aryas, is a more literal translation, Pape Dembashi, because they're these 4 things that, 4 truths that a being who's reached that level of realization, that they have a direct non-conceptual experience of, a realization of, that profoundly transforms, what they are as a person, from someone who has a lot of afflictive emotions and the seeds of afflictive emotions to someone who is at the first stage of becoming completely free of the seeds of afflictive emotions, which means even the possibility of giving rise to disturbing emotions arising in their continuum again. So it's a very significant, it's a very pivotal juncture in the spiritual path to reach the level of an Arya, or a noble one. And so, so that's why they're called the 4 truths of the Aryas, or the noble ones, or the 4 Noble Truths for short. And the 4 Noble Truths are essentially the truth of suffering, the truth of the origins of suffering, or the cause of suffering, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path, right? These 4, the truth of suffering, the truth of cause of suffering, or the origins of suffering, and where does suffering come from, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. This is the first teaching that the Buddha gave. And the way he gave this teaching was he described each of the 4 Noble Truths in brief 3 times, in 3 cycles. And the first cycle, he just explained, like, this is suffering, this is the truth of suffering, this is cessation, this is the path. And then for us, is the most relevant, is the second cycle, where he said, suffering should be known. The truth of suffering should be known. You can say the truth of the origins of suffering should be abandoned. The truth of cessation should be attained. And the truth of the path should be practiced. Right? So that explains kind of how they relate to each other. Meaning, the truth of suffering should be abandoned. That's what we need to understand, like how we're in the nature of suffering, and then generate a desire to get rid of that, to abandon that, to be free from that. But in order to do that, we have to understand what are the causes of suffering. I might have missaid it earlier, but he said the truth of the origins of suffering should be known. No, I think I said it correctly. I did say it correctly, yeah. The truth of the origins of suffering should be known. So in order to abandon suffering and dissatisfying, unpleasant experiences, we have to know why they arise. What is the cause that gives rise to them? And then check if we can abandon that cause. So the truth of the origins of suffering should be known. And then if it's possible to abandon those causes, then that's what we want to do. We want to achieve the abandonment or the cessation of those causes of suffering. So that's why he said the truth of suffering should be attained or won. But then in order to do that, we actually have to know, well, what is the step-by-step process to go through to abandon the causes of suffering? And that is the path. So the truth of the path should be practiced. That's what we need to practice. And then in this third cycle of going through those, then the Buddha was just describing his own experience by saying that I have abandoned suffering, I have known the causes of suffering, I have achieved the cessation of suffering, and I have practiced to completion the path of suffering. So he's speaking about his own insight into an understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So the way the Four Noble Truths are organized is you can kind of see there's two sets. One set on the side of what is to be abandoned, and one set is on the side of what is to be acquired or attained, right? So the first two, the truth of suffering and the truth of the causes of suffering, are both what we want to get rid of, right? And they're a description of how we experience dissatisfaction and why, right? And then the second set of two, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path, are on the side of purification, how we become gradually more and more pure and achieve a state of being completely free from suffering and its causes. So there's these two sets in that way. And then within each set, there's a cause and effect, right? Where the truth of suffering is the effect of the truth of the origins of suffering, right? This is the truth of the causes of suffering and the origins of suffering. Those are the things that give rise to and produce again and again, not just once, but continually, again and again, the effects are our own dissatisfying, confusing, painful, misfortunate, unfortunate experiences, right? All the problems we have in our life. And then on the side of the purified, there's the truth of the path is a cause of the truth of cessation. So it's by practicing the path that we achieve the result, its effect, the truth of cessation. Although the truth of cessation actually is something permanent, so actually it doesn't have a cause, just a bit technical, but you do achieve it by means of a path of practice. So don't worry about that too much, but that's a bit of a little wrinkle in the description. So the way the Four Noble Truths work in our own practice is analogous to dealing with an illness, right? So when we have an illness, say we get the flu, that's analogous, like the flu and the symptoms that go together with the flu, having a fever, having aching joints, having, your stomach feeling upset or not well. Those are like those symptoms suffering feelings are analogous to the truth of suffering. So when we start to have a fever and feel faint or weak, have aching in the joints, then we realize there's something wrong, right? And then we wonder, well, why is it? What's going on, right? So then we might go to a doctor and get some tests done, with our to see if we have an infection. Is it a virus or a bacteria or what? So then that's analogous to looking for the truth of the causes, the truth of the cause of suffering and the origins of suffering. And when, specifically discovering the causes of our illness, then there's something that's caused us to feel that way, right? So there's a cause that's given rise to these symptoms of illness. So then, it's very important to identify the causes, because until we don't identify the causes, like what's making us feel sick, we can't do anything effective, to get rid of that. We just have to wait and bear it out, right? Although with the suffering of samsara, it's not that you can just wait and eventually it'll dissipate and go away. It's a perpetual cycle that goes on and on and on and on without end, unless we apply antidotes to it. So that's so the illness, and then discovering the cause of the illness. Like we have to know that we're sick. We want to abandon the illness, and to do that we have to know the causes of the illness, anything like that. And then once we know the causes of the illness, well, then the question comes, well, is it actually possible to abandon it? Is there a medicine to treat it, or is there something I can do to make this illness go away, right? To quickly recover from it. So if it's possible to be free from that illness, again, then that would be like the cessation, the understanding that, and that's what we want to achieve. We want to achieve total freedom from this illness, and that freedom, the cessation of the illness, and the peace and sort of health, the sense of good health that comes with the elimination of that illness, is like cessation, the truth of cessation. And then we have to, we have to understand the illness, the cause of the illness, that it's possible to be free from the illness. Then the question is, well, what do I have to do to be free from that illness? What's the medicine I take, or what kind of exercise or diet should I take? What should I do to be free from the illness? Do I have to undergo surgery or some other kind of treatment, right? So that's like the truth of the path, right? The path of practice, the procedures, the practice we engage in to be actually achieve the cessation. So that's the logic of the Four Noble Truths. So the way the Four Noble Truths are presented and the order they're presented in is as, the way someone who wants to practice on Buddhism, basically, the way they should approach Buddhist teachings, to understand, what are the problems that I have that I want to be free from, to reduce and eliminate. And then what are the causes of those problems? Is it possible then to be free from those problems and the causes of those problems? And what would that be like? And imagine kind of the ease and the peace that would come to the mind and the body with being free from those problems. And then the question, well, what's the path of practice, right? And so this kind of way of approaching our life as a whole and specific problems within our life and our whole situation of many lives, right, in samsara. This is the overarching kind of framework and understanding for all of the Buddhist teachings. So all of the Buddhist teachings are related directly or indirectly to every aspect of the Buddhist teachings are solely for the purpose of bringing peace and well-being to the body and minds of sentient beings. And the different ways that they do that are related to, all related to the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths is like this overarching framework for understanding, all of the Buddhist teachings. So why don't let's meditate a little bit on what, a friend of mine who introduced me to this kind of way of meditating on the Four Noble Truths, he calls Andy Weistrich, he calls the therapeutic method of the Four Noble Truths. But I find it's a very helpful way to contemplate and sort of understand the logic of the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so yeah, move around a little bit so that you can sit comfortably for 10 minutes or so. And then gradually bring your attention to your breath. Just focus on your breath for a minute or so. Mm. So to meditate on the Four Noble Truths, we can kind of think of them in relation to a kind of small, tangible problem that we have, that we actually have. No, before thinking about the whole big, thing of being in samsara, just think of a concrete um, problem or difficulty you're currently facing in your life. And if you're new to this kind of meditation, don't start with the biggest, most kind of difficult, seemingly insurmountable or disturbing or traumatic kind of difficulty you're facing, because you could easily sort of just be overwhelmed by thinking about that and then not be able to kind of follow this meditation process. So think of something manageable that, is that clearly it's a source of disturbance, a source of dissatisfaction, and concern. It is a problem clearly identified, but it's not something, it feels kind of overwhelming. So just think about that problem, right? And all the different aspects of it. How does it disturb you? How does it cause a disturbance kind of in your life, in your mind or in your body or in your relationships with others, in your, thoughts about, idea of what might happen in the future? So in what way does it cause, tension to arise when you think of it in your body, or discomfort or gnawing in your stomach? Or does it just bring like confusion in the mind and you just feel total uncertainty or self-doubt? Or does it, give rise to enmity for others, strong dislike or irritation when you think about others? So try to think about a specific problem and the nature of the problem, and then the different ways in which it causes disturbance and destroys the peace in your life. Mm. And then think about the causes of this problem. Did this problem you're focusing on, did it always exist in the past? Probably not. And if not, then how did it arise? What are the different causes and conditions, the different factors from your own side, from the side of others, in the environment, or whatever is relevant that gave rise to this problem and caused it to persist now? Right? So this is analogous to the truth of the origins or the cause of suffering. Right? So thinking about understanding, recognizing a problem is analogous to the truth of suffering, knowing the truth of suffering. Or sorry, abandoning the truth of suffering. Well, anyway, recognizing the problem that we want to get rid of and we want to abandon. And then here, knowing the causes of the problem. So what are the causes give rise to the problem you're thinking about? Mm. And then try to imagine a cessation. Is it possible to utterly eliminate or bring to an end this problem and the causes of it, such that it will never arise again? And what would that be like? Try to imagine what that would feel like. What would that be like to be completely free from this problem and the causes of it? So there's two things here. Is it possible to be free from it, this problem and the causes of it? Consider that. And then if it is, or to whatever degree it is, try to imagine what that would be like to be completely free from this problem and the causes of it. Mm. And then finally consider, in order to actualize this cessation, in order to actually be free from this problem and its causes, what are some tangible steps I can take? Some practical steps that I can take? What would be a path to being progressively more and more and ultimately completely free from this problem? What can I do from now that would be part of a resolution to this problem? Mm. So to conclude, just review these 4 steps that are analogous to the Four Noble Truths. First, recognizing a problem that we wish to abandon. Then coming to a deeper understanding of the causes that give rise to the problem in the past and in the present, or even in the future. And then considering whether it's possible to completely abandon that problem and what that would be like, to experience the kind of peace of the cessation of that problem. And then considering what's the path to become progressively more and more free from that problem and eventually attain the cessation of it. So what is the path of practical action that you can engage in? So summarize those for yourself. And then one last question before we end is we can ask is, by looking at a problem in this kind of way, in this kind of methodical way, does it make you feel more capable to do something about it? By looking at a problem in this way, the problem, its causes, the possibility of cessation, and the pathway leading to the cessation, does it make you feel more capable or enthused or empowered to work towards a resolution of this problem? Mm. Okay, so relax your attention there. So that's the meditation on the therapeutic method of the Four Noble Truths. You enjoy that? That's nice, no? I always find very helpful. No? And what about the last thing I asked you to think about? Does it help you feel more empowered or capable to do something, actually do something about the problem? Yeah, does, no? We naturally do that every day, but sometimes I think, sometimes we don't do so clearly and kind of deliberately, no? A lot of times we have problems and we think, it's such a hassle, and then we kind of vaguely think about why is it there, and vaguely think about, what can I do? Usually we jump to what can I do about it right away. But to think kind of methodically about, okay, what are the causes of it? Why is it arising? Then how can I deal with those causes? How can I minimize those causes? Then what would it be like actually to be free from the problem? I find that step gives a lot of enthusiasm to actually do something. And then what can I practically do? But that way of looking at the Four Noble Truths is like a microcosm, right? Of course, when the Buddha is speaking about, teaching the Four Noble Truths, yes, on the one, he wasn't primarily speaking about small problems we have in our everyday lives, being free from those. He's talking about the bigger problem of being in samsara, having anger arise, having afflictive emotions, being under the control of negative karma and so forth. These big problems. But it's the pattern is the same for how do we deal with those. And I mean, many aspects of Buddhist teachings are to deal with specific smaller problems, right? Both. So, yeah. So really, I mean, when we look at it in a more classical way, look at the truth of suffering, it's really more talking about just the fact that, like there's different lists of all different kinds of suffering. Like one is the suffering of birth, just the suffering of taking birth uncontrollably, right? And then as soon as we experience birth, then we begin experiencing aging, right? And then as we become older, especially, in the later part of our life, then the sufferings of aging become more and more manifest, or become weak, and the mind becomes more unclear, and we're more prone to illness and injury, and feel more alienated from others. Our bodies don't appear attractive as in the way that they did before when we were younger, and can't sleep as well. And then there's the suffering of sickness. Whether we're young or old, we all experience different illnesses, infections, and fevers, and cancer, and all kind of things, right? And then eventually, at the end, as soon as we experience birth, then inevitably there's a suffering of death, where we die, and we're separated forever from all of our friends and family and everything that was familiar to us in this life. It's like at the beginning of life, the difficulty is just figuring things out, becoming familiar with things. And then the middle of our life, we're quite comfortable and all familiar with things. Then the end of life, we have to be separated from all of that. So it's like all that work of understanding the world is all lost. And then if we take rebirth, we start all over again, no? So, so the Buddha is really talking about more the bigger, just our state of being in this condition whereby we take birth, experience old age, sickness, and death, and then take birth again, and again experience that, and again, and again, and again. And that's samsara, that continuum of uncontrollably taking rebirths through the force of karma and afflictive emotions. Like that's, when we talk about samsara or cyclic existence, that's what, in Buddhism is being talked about. And so, yeah, I mean, in the truth of suffering, two things, the Buddha kind of explicitly pointed out, is that one reason we suffer is because things are impermanent. Things are changing. Everything's changing all the time. Like that's one big, factor of suffering and samsara is there's no certainty. There's no certainty what's going to happen, like at any given moment, There's no certainty what's going to happen in our bodies. Our bodies are so fragile. The way other people are going to treat us is unpredictable. What's going to happen in the environment? There could be storms or earthquakes or floods, or like who could have predicted the COVID-19? I think when COVID-19 arose, we all had this kind of feeling like, oh, humans are so developed now. We have such advanced medical technology and just so much power over the environment, like nothing could really like that could ever happen. It was a shock, to people, including me. But yet it happened, no? Some virus mutates and then nobody knows how to cure it and people are dying from it. All of a sudden, millions of people died, all over the world from that. So it's like, that's an example of impermanence. Things are changing all the time so that even what happiness we have, it's not like we're totally bereft of happiness. We all have a lot of pleasure and happiness and good fortune, but that also is not stable. It's not really lasting. To maintain a degree of happiness, we have to keep doing things. It's like our teeth. Like it feels so nice when you brush your teeth and they feel all clean, like in the morning or after a meal. But if only they would stay like that, no? But they don't, within a few hours, there's plaque again, and you have bad breath or hunger, You eat a meal, you feel, oh, it's so great. But then before long, you're going to be hungry again. You sleep, you get up, feel well rested. By halfway through the day, you feel tired again. Wish you could have another sleep, but you can't. You have to keep going. Yeah. So, and then, other people, you think, oh, have a really good friendship with this person, and then suddenly you find out something about them, or they do something. You're just totally out of the blue, that is really upsetting. So there's impermanence is we grasp when, especially when things are going well, we grasp at that being the same, but yet that's just not reality. Things change. And then another is many things that are not fundamentally sources of pleasure, we grasp at as being in the nature of pleasure and happiness. Again, like things like food or being clean, like we think, we feel good when we're clean, but like, no matter, even if we could keep our body clean all the time, like that won't really bring us happiness. Like eventually we'll just get bored with that, right? Or other people and going to places, like we like traveling. But, I've been a traveler, traveled around a lot, and you can see, I mean, eventually it's kind of all the same, no? It's just scenery and a bit different flavors, different smells. Actually, it's not like anything special. It's kind of all the same. So, and yeah, I mean, most of the pleasures we experience, they're kind of like that. Like they don't really fundamentally give us satisfaction. Ultimately, we have to find a source of happiness within ourselves, within our own mind. Because that's all and that's all we have at death, no? At the time of death, like we won't be able to travel anywhere. We won't be able to laugh at anyone's jokes. We won't be able to watch anything that we enjoy. But we have to find some source of well-being, contentment with just who we are as a person, how we are as a person, in a fundamental way. That's why love, I mean, just the attitude of love is one of the most reliable, consistent, stable sources of happiness. Caring about others, right? Having an affection for the environment, an affection for others, a wholesome affection for ourselves. Just loving, wishing for the well-being of ourselves, wishing for the well-being of others is something, the more we cultivate that, the more happiness, by the way, it brings us, right? And, even when everything else is just, going crazy, we can always rely on that, the intention for, especially for others, to be well, to be happy. Yeah. So that's the truth of suffering. And then the truth of the causes of suffering is primarily, and I won't go into too much detail because we don't have too much time, but is the truth of the cause of suffering is primarily karma, especially negative karma that we ourselves have created. So according to the Buddha, because everything, as I was explaining earlier, everything arises from cause and effect. So when we have sickness, what's the cause of that sickness? Well, sickness is a kind of physical harm to our physical bodies. So the cause for that is us ourselves having perpetrated harm to the bodies of others or to our own body in the past, right? That's what gives rise to harm in our body. And like when other people betray us, like in friendships or in a family, we feel betrayed by others. Like what is the cause of, others kind of taking advantage of our trust is ourselves having done the same in the past, in this life or past lives. Ourselves having, betrayed others, taken advantage of others' trust in us. When other people criticize or belittle us, what's the cause of that? Ourselves having done the same thing. So in short, karma is the Buddhist explanation of everything, especially in our personal experience and how things affect us, is due to our own karma. And then why do we, so in order to abandon creating causes of karma, then basic ethics, morality in Buddhism is to abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions. Right? So there's the 3 non-virtues of body are killing, stealing others' possessions, and then sexual misconduct and sexual activity that's harmful to others or harmful to ourselves. And then the 4 non-virtues of speech are lying, slander, where we malign someone to a third person. And then thereby we destroy the harmony between those people, destroy their wholesome view of each other, their good view of each other. And then harsh speech, where we insult, use hurtful language to insult and belittle others. And then idle gossip, where we just speak about things that are totally meaningless and irrelevant and not beneficial to ourselves or others, that just waste time. And then the 3 non-virtues of the mind are having a malevolent intention, malice, the intention to harm or that harm befall others. And then covetousness, being attracted to the possessions or the status or qualities of others, and then wanting to have those for ourselves, coveting those for ourselves. And then ignorance and wrong views, you could say, actually, is the third, is like having destructive attitudes about things. For example, having the attitude that nothing matters. Whatever I do, whatever I say, it doesn't really matter in the end. Because that view then can lead you into saying and doing things that are actually hurtful to others. But if you think it doesn't matter, then it undermines your caring about that, right? So these are the 10 non-virtuous actions. And so by abandoning those, then we abandon creating all of the heaviest karmas, negative karma with our body, with our speech, and with our mind. And it's quite easy. And then, so karma is one of the main causes of suffering. And then, but why do we engage in harmful actions? Because we have delusions in our mind. We have strong emotions, disturbing emotions in our mind, like anger is the most obvious and the most destructive, but also like attachment or greed, jealousy. And then those are both the underlying cause for both of those is selfish concern. Recently, I was teaching one course here, I think last Sunday, and one of the students in the course, Fred, told me about this commencement speech that was given at the college I graduated from, Kenyon College, by Alan Foster Wallace, I think is his name. Anyway, I just listened to it yesterday while I was taking a walk, and it's so brilliant. He describes this. I don't know what his relationship with Buddhism is, but he describes so vividly and very, very colorfully and accurately this selfish concern we all have, how we are each at the center of our own worlds, and we think we're each at the most important person in the world. Like each of us carry that around as a fundamental attitude we have like all the time, that we're the most important. And then we justify, complaining about everybody else because of that, because they're not me, essentially, right? But this is also, this is the Buddha's prognosis, that this is the fundamental cause of our suffering, is this selfish concern. And that's based on this instinctual feeling that we have that we are something very real and concrete, and we're the most important thing in the world, right? But that sense of us being more important is, at a more subtle level, is just the sense that at our core is a real self, that is unquestionably just there, right? So yeah, but this is all in the context of afflictive emotion. So the truth, and in the context of the Four Noble Truths. So the truth of the cause of suffering, Buddha said, is primarily karma and afflictive emotions or disturbing emotions. Those are synonyms. Yeah. And those are all what's to be abandoned. And then the truth of cessation. Cessation is like a quality of our mind, mainly, because the causes are karma. They're created by motivation. We have to do things. And the seeds of karma ride in our continuum, right? And then, but the root of karma is afflictive emotions. And those are all states of mind, attitudes or thoughts that we have, that when they arise, they disturb the peace of our continuum, right? They disturb us. And so the abandonment of those is also a quality of the mind. The complete freedom from those and the peace that comes from being completely free from disturbing emotions and the potential for them to arise in the future is this sort of incredible clarity and peace and calm and ease that comes in the mind of the person. So mainly the truth of cessation is like a quality of the person, but also quality of the mind. And then the path of practice is like all the Buddhist practices, like from anapanasati to abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions, to meditating on loving kindness and compassion, generating mental focus, understanding about dependent arising and emptiness. Like all of this is part of the path, right? And the path, you can divide the path into two primary aspects or parts on the side of wisdom and the side of method, right? And these are described like two wings of a bird. For a bird to fly, it needs two wings. If it just has one wing, it can't fly. So to make progress in spiritual practice, on the one hand, you need wisdom and a correct understanding of what is your problem, what are the causes of that problem, how to be free from that problem, right? But in addition to that wisdom and correct understanding, you also need a good motivation. You need sincerity. You need faith. You need kindness and honesty, right? So you need all this whole method side of the path, and you need to accumulate merit, right? You need to engage in virtuous actions to accumulate a store of positive energy to support you on the path. So there's the wisdom side of the path, and then the method side of the path is everything else apart from the wisdom. So that's the path. So that's the Four Noble Truths, and that's all I'm going to teach you for this this course, Buddhism in a nutshell. Unless you have questions, right? Then I'll be happy to answer your questions. So we went over, just to review, we went over the meditation posture, and then how to set up a meditation session. And then I think we went over, the meaning of Buddha, right? The term etymology of Buddha and Buddhism. And then some kind of unique features of Buddhism in comparison to other major world religions. And then, the historical, division of different traditions and schools, lineages within Buddhism, and then how to relate to those as a practitioner, how to deal with navigating all these different shades of Buddhism. And then, and the life of the Buddha. We went over before all that, the life of Shakyamuni Buddha himself, we went over yesterday. And then the first teaching of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. We went over. So we covered a lot of ground. Very good. So yeah, questions about anything going forward? I hope that was helpful. For you old students, you guys know this stuff. Yeah, it's good to go over these things again and again. Hopefully pick up some new things here and there. Yeah. Yeah, there's so much now. Buddhism is really vast. Just think about the life of the Buddha. That's something I want to try to learn more about and remember more and use more in my own practice and in teachings is different anecdotes, different events from the life of the Buddha. There's always more to know. That's one thing from myself, having studied Buddhism for a long time. I've come to the conclusion, like, it takes lifetimes. You can't really feel like you know it well in one life. There's just no way. It's just so vast, the Buddha's teachings. Yes.
So after this intro course, if someone wants to learn more about Buddhism, do you have any recommendation?
Wow, that's a good question, Asha. Actually, maybe it's better you answer that. No? Okay. Yeah, this is a very this is like the most introductory level kind of course in this and Meditation 101. We also have a very short similar course, similar introductory level called Meditation 101, which I don't know when it's being offered again. I taught it earlier this year. Probably next year sometime I'll teach it again, but in the meantime someone else might teach it. Or you can find, other, because now there's so many things online. You can find one really good resource is the FPMT webpage. I'd mentioned this center, Ocean of Compassion, is part of a bigger international Buddhist organization called Foundation for the Preservation of Mahayana Tradition. And the acronym is FPMT. They have a very good, very extensive website. And you can find other centers, around the world offering things online. So you could probably find Buddhist Meditation 101 offered, at least every month somewhere. And then, it's kind of a next level, bit more advanced, but not much more, and a bit more extensive course is Buddhist Mind Science that we're offering here at this center. Buddhist Mind Science, it's called. And it's quite a kind of a secular sort of way of going through major themes in Buddhism with a strong emphasis on meditation and practice. And so that is, I think that's on roughly every other Sunday morning. Yeah, here at Ocean of Compassion. But you can also find it, offered again at different venues. Even in the Bay Area, Elaine Jackson is going to be teaching it at the Wisdom Center in downtown Santa Cruz from, I don't know, this week sometime. Yeah. And then, I mean, if you're really interested in Buddhism and want to get a quite good, very extensive introduction to Buddhism over a couple of years, there's Discovering Buddhism, which we're just coming to the end of one. It takes about 2 years to go through all the modules of Discovering Buddhism, but it's a very thorough, introduction to kind of the whole breadth of Buddhist teachings. And also there's readings, very good readings that go along with that, and then homework and discussion group and guided meditation, all as part of that. It takes about 2 years to complete that whole course. Yeah. And you can also just take one module, you can take modules independently. You don't have to take the whole course or nothing. Same with Buddhist mind science. You can also just, participate in even just one session on its own. There's no commitment to do the entire thing for either of those courses. So, yeah, and then there's a lot of excellent books by His Holiness Dalai Lama, by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, by Lama Yeshe, the two founders of this organization, and by others. There's so many. When I was starting, just 25 years ago, there weren't that many books, and now there's so much. Every year there's more and more coming out. Yeah. And actually, as Buddhism's spreading in the West, in the contemporary world, there's a lot of really good scholarship that's actually not just translating or kind of rehashing what's already been taught, but doing new research on historical aspects of Buddhism, comparative on Buddhism, exposition of different lineage. So there's a lot. And then also like socially engaged Buddhism, Buddhism in the environment, Buddhism in like Western psychology and positive psychology. So, and Buddhism and neuroscience. There's all kind of really fascinating fields to learn about. So even more. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no other kind of questions right on the tip of your tongue, then we can just we can dedicate the merit to end. Okay. Thank you, Beth, for your note. Yeah. So think of whatever positive energy we've created, merit or virtue, from the beginning of the first session on Friday, and then through the day, the morning yesterday, and then this morning. I feel like, we've really done something worthwhile and beneficial and virtuous to reflect on Shakyamuni Buddha and his teachings. Yeah, and our own, relationship to those, and to, the larger picture of spiritual practice and religion. And, with the larger motivation, the larger aim, just to make our lives more meaningful and use our lives in a way that is more beneficial to ourselves and thereby, beneficial to others as well. So by the merit we've created, we can think how wonderful it is and rejoice, and think by the force of this merit, may the Buddha Dharma expand and grow in the world, and all other spiritual practices and religious traditions that bring benefit to beings, may they also flourish more and more in the world. And may those traditions and also all sentient beings, like ourselves, live in harmony with one another and have minds of affection and caring, concern for one another. May all those minds who are filled with hatred and animosity towards others be completely transformed into minds of loving kindness and compassion. And may all those who suffer in various ways, all those who have sickness, may they be healed. All those who are lonely, may they have companionship, friendship. All those who are confused, may they have clarity. All those who are depressed, may their minds be uplifted with joy and enthusiasm. May all those who are hungry, may they have food. All those who are bereft of shelter, may they have homes and shelter. All those who have physical or mental illness, may they have medicine and treatment to cure those illness. And then bring to mind any other prayers that you yourself would like to make. So bring those intentions to mind. Mm. So may all those your own virtuous intentions be accomplished in accordance with your wishes. And especially may the center hosting this course, Ocean of Compassion Buddhist Center, may it be free of every obstacle and have every supportive condition for spreading the Dharma, especially that may they be able to have the best possible situation for the housing of the center, either to be able to remain in the current premises or be able to find even better new premises where they can host more and more programs and also have enough volunteers and financial support and legal whatever legal permissions and so forth, whatever is needed for the center to flourish. Yeah, and for the larger FPMT organization as well. And then just finally, I'd like to just remind you that the center, Ocean of Compassion, they are sustained by donations. So any donations supporting the center are treasured, and they make it possible to offer programs like this in the future for others. So thank you all, and for your participation. So glad to see you here through from the whole thing, from the beginning to the end. And I hope there's some benefit. If there is, please try to remember that and make use of it. If not, then I apologize and hope you can find something more worthwhile. Hope we meet again somewhere, somehow. Okay, take care.
Thank you, Geshe.
Geshe.